24 hours had passed. Stopping and lowering his head, he added that it was finally over. The girl looked at her phone. She smiled, saying that his brain was fine, let him relax his body, flexibility is a must. We are being transported to a high-rise building. The girl, looking at her protege, asked if he remembered the video he had watched. She would demonstrate it so that he would follow what she was doing. After which she knelt down, and then she arched her back strongly. The protagonist looked at her in surprise, thinking that such flexibility with this body was incredible. After which he sat down on the carpet, and the girl told him to try. Larry arched his back. His body began to shake when he reached the halfway point. His trainer replied that he should not overdo it, flexibility takes time. The protagonist clenched his teeth, and the girl said that they would increase the amplitude of the movement little by little, repeating the same stance every day. In other words, immediately tear the muscles, which he thought that such healing after a muscle tear increases his flexibility. Exhaling, he thought that then he did not need to do it little by little because immortals quickly heal from injuries. After which he arched completely, thinking that he only needed to endure a short-term pain. The girl looked at him with displeasure, her mouth wide open. Coming closer, she shouted that everything was okay with him. She told him not to overdo it. Who taught him to be so naughty? The protagonist fell to the floor, and he laughed. Picking him up, he asked that he was able to do this. The girl, looking at him in surprise, answered that he was very interesting. After which Larry extended his hand to her, telling her to help him up. A huge piece of meat appeared in the oven, and someone said that it was enough for today, they needed to eat. The protagonist, looking at the dish, asked that they eat a whole pig. The girl replied that this was her portion. After which she pointed to the second piece, answered that this is his. Larry thought that one whole pig per person. The trainer put on gloves, answering that food is also training. Let him get used to it. Accumulate enough energy to move later. When he eats, the protagonist answered in surprise that she is a bear coming out of hibernation. After which he and the girl pounced on the food. Biting off a piece, she told him not to clean up after eating. Just put it there. 2 days a week is too little. It is not even enough to learn the main points. The protagonist thought that it was incredibly delicious. It was just a piglet roasted with some spices. Maybe it was because he had not eaten all day. The girl, continuing to eat, told him to eat everything. If he left even a little, he would die. Larry answered that he had learned since childhood not to leave food. The trainer, stepping aside, said that she was going, after eating, let him wash up and go to bed. Larry sat on the mattress, sighing deeply. He smiled, thinking that this was much better than sleeping with mosquitoes in the forest, and unlike his previous teacher, he could use the phone. He glanced at the screen, wondering if maybe he should call his mother. When he picked it up, a voice came through and asked how he was feeling. The protagonist wondered if she was worried about him after being sent, and then he replied that he was absolutely not. Suddenly, he was interrupted, saying that she had told him 10 times that his coach shouldn't be easy on him just because they had known each other for a long time. Larry looked ahead in surprise, his face turning pale. He stared ahead silently, and his mother said that she was still worried. If she was being too soft with him, he should tell her to be stricter. Larry thoughtfully lowered his head, thinking that how could he not be worried about his son. Lifting the barbell, he thought that he had realized something after training on the second day. If the immortal's training is mentality, the shapeshifter's training is ignorant actions. You need to know and exceed your limits. That's the essence of training. Looking down, he thought that science is added to training using many devices and electronic applications. In any case, the conclusion he came to in time was this. The girl, looking at the tablet, said that his reflexes are very bad. She went down to the barbell, adding that he should lift it, and Larry thought that 20 kilograms on both sides with the barbell is only 60. Lifting the barbell, he continued to think that it would not be difficult for him. His strength is 3 times greater than that of an ordinary adult man. Suddenly his coach told him to carry it and follow her. The protagonist went up the steps. The girl, turning around, told him to run with her now. Larry stared ahead in surprise for a few seconds. He looked at the thin beam and thought that this was the second part of the crazy training after the blade training. His face went pale and the trainer said that balance, let him always keep the center of balance and use his reflexes for the rest. Larry asked if this worked, to which she said that he would test it until it worked. The protagonist lifted the barbell, thinking that they used the corners of the basement floor. It is long, the width is only half of his foot, then he said that it is okay if he falls. The girl, looking at the tablet, answered that the probability of injury from a fall from a height of 3 meters is small, although he should not run. Preparing for the fall, the first priority should be to protect his body. The protagonist took a deep breath, thinking that he could do this at all. He needed to end this. The coach said that it was disadvantageous if he was injured on the battlefield, since their bodies did not recover out of ignorance like immortals. Larry suddenly ran forward, thinking that the teacher who was watching the program behind him said that he needed to take care of his body, but an immortal like him would quickly recover even broken bones, so he would run, preparing for a fall. The girl looked in front of her in surprise. The protagonist, pushing off, used the ability 5 senses, thinking that his touch skill could sense the pressure on his running shoes and find a sense of balance. Beads of sweat appeared on his face, and he thought that although most have insane reflexes, they cannot compare to immortals who specialize in feelings. In a moment he was already on the other side, thinking that he could do it. It really seemed funny, and there was no chance that his foot would be pierced by the blade. Turning around, he said that he had successfully completed it. The girl sat down on a chair, answering that he should do 2 more times there and back. Then she looked ahead in surprise. Frowning, she thought that the board was 4 centimeters wide, 50 centimeters long, but he completed it without bending over even once. After a while, a long line appeared, and she said that it raised the level. The protagonist's face turned pale, and he wondered if it was a wire. Looking down, he added that he should run on it. The trainer answered that everything was fine. This installation was called a single line. Lowering her hands, she continued to say that the wooden board was just a small step. She thought that the protagonist was crazy, looking at his body, but she thinks that he was born with a good physique, he has good balance. Larry, looking forward, said that this time there is a mattress. The teacher replied that it is strong and will not break, so he should be careful when he falls. His skin will tear if he grabs the wire, so he should just fall. Looking ahead in surprise, he thought that after he gets used to the start, he will have to run carrying a barbell, but he is not afraid of it. It is lightweight compared to the immortal's training. He took a step forward onto the line, thinking that the difficulty of this course is hellish level. It is harder and harder. His leg began to wobble, and he thought that the wire is strong and does not shake much. Looking around the room, he began to think that this was not a fall from a cliff and that there was no hurricane blowing here. A second later, he took another step forward, thinking that there was even a mattress on the floor. Then he frowned, thinking that he was not afraid of this. He would just try to run forward. Then he took a few quick steps. Suddenly, he began to lose his balance, waving his arms. He was able to freeze in place, thinking that maybe he should go slower. He took a step forward, then, pushing off, he lifted his leg. A second later, he made several quick jumps. The girl looked at him with a smile, and Larry thought that that day the teacher looked at him as if he was more interesting than the video she was watching and made him run in line with the bar all day. We are transported to the next day. The protagonist is standing on the street with a suitcase, bowing. The girl, looking at him, said that they will see each other next week. The car moved forward quickly. The protagonist's mother, sitting behind the wheel, asked him if he was interested and why she was making him do this. Larry answered that of course. She looked menacingly in front of her and replied that she could not bear to watch her son being beaten. The protagonist turned pale, an image of him hitting a man appeared in his head, and the woman said that he should know the limits of his current body. He was too weak now. Larry thought that if his friends heard this, they would faint from shock, after which he looked down with displeasure, thinking that since the situation was like this, he might as well practice some more when he went to the gym later. He would at least be able to help and not interfere, although the immortal special forces that the teacher had talked about would bother us. We are transported to a skyscraper. A lot of dirty dishes appear in front of us. Someone thanks us for the food. The woman, looking ahead in surprise, asked him about the fact that he had been hungry for several days. Larry replied that he had learned how valuable her cooking was after 4 days, and now he wanted to learn how to cook. The woman turned around in surprise, and the protagonist continued to say that male chefs were in fashion now, let them teach him how to cook for his future wife. The woman looked ahead menacingly, replying that it sounded good, but didn't he need the sexual part? With his body he could become a pig chef. The protagonist, patting his stomach, replied that his mother was, as always, witty. The woman replied that she was serious, so he should stop relying only on his body and eating all day long. Remembering his teacher, Larry, smiling, said that he would start with cooking anyway, thinking that he remembered a dish from a man of nature. Then he raised his head, thinking that the food issue was solved. Training. He couldn't do anything about it. What would they do next week? Would it be the same thing or a new type of training? A full moon appeared in the sky. The guy was cleaning his knife. He looked ahead with a smirk, and Larry wondered that whatever they were doing, could it be harder than what they did last time? Larry, his mouth wide open, fell down. The crows flew away in surprise. He fell to the ground, and blood appeared around him, and he thought that after a 4-day break, the teacher said, the training before this was just basic training, offered separately from the entrance requirements. The protagonist clutched the ground, thinking that in other words, the blade field, fainting resistance, and cliff jumping were now mandatory courses. He completed the last course by throwing himself off the cliff. Larry stood up, clutching his head. He sighed, thinking that maybe it was the wild training, but despite the painful part, this course quickly became much better. The problem was that it was just basic training. Looking at the guy, he heard him yell at Larry to get up if he was done. The teacher grabbed the blade, saying that one of the benefits of immortality is regeneration. When he gets shot with a gun, it's fine as the bullet either goes through him or he just pushes the bullet out and regenerates flesh and skin. But a weapon like that without firepower is a pain in the ass. It takes time for an amputated limb to regenerate. The protagonist replied that's why he said they should be careful. The guy swung the machete, replying that he can afford to receive attacks that deal damage within a short distance, but he should avoid such attacks. Larry thought he was swinging like a murderer. He stepped back in fear, adding that means the reason he pulled out the blade. The guy replied that what he was thinking. Then he lunged forward, holding out his dagger, and the protagonist thought that this training was a continuation of learning how to wield a blade, so to avoid the blade, or rather, he needed to deflect it. Larry dodged the first swing, then he ducked his head, dodging the second. He jumped back sharply. The guy, looking at him, said that the goal here is to avoid serious injuries, getting small ones instead. It's useless if he avoids everything. It seems he's a bit athletic. He'll start with the easy ones. The protagonist, frowning, thought that how could he not avoid it? The guy jumped forward. A second later, he cut the protagonist's stomach. He slashed the blade at his leg, shouting that if he grabs his thigh or calf muscles, let him take the blow with his shin or deflect it to the side. A second later, it hit his arm. Larry, looking menacingly ahead, will be hit by a blade. At least he has already made the blade installation. A second later, the protagonist's wounds began to heal. The guy, looking menacingly ahead, said that he regenerates quite well, and they need to continue. Then he rushed towards Larry. Blood flew to the side. The protagonist was on his knees, and his teacher said that it was anemia. This is one of the weaknesses of immortality. Larry replied that this means he carries blood bags for transfusions. The guy replied that usually yes, it is better to stop the bleeding in advance. Then he turned around and began to leave, adding that they needed to take a break. Larry, healing his wounds, replied that he is a cook today, said that he is going to cook instant ramen. We are transported to a room. There are many ingredients on the table. Someone says that it is spaghetti with meat sauce. A beautiful dish appears in front of us with a note from his mother that if he wants good food, he should cook something with lots of sauce. The teacher ate some pasta. Then, smiling and looking ahead, he said that it was delicious, to which the protagonist replied that at least his taste buds were fine. Since immortals have good senses and his taste buds are sensitive, he can still enjoy it. The guy continued eating the food, answering that cooking is also a form of training. He puffed out his cheeks, adding that this is necessary to dull the sense of taste. We are transported outside. The protagonist, looking at his teacher, asks what they will repeat. The teacher replies that Larry is used to taking blows from a blade on the muscles of the arm, which means. A second later, he lunged forward. The protagonist's face turned pale. The teacher's knife was stained with blood, and he said that it was time for the training of organ steam regeneration. Larry fell to his knees, and the teacher told him to wait. Organ regeneration takes a long time, so basic strength training is a must. The protagonist began to tremble in fear, thinking that he could not dodge. There were no premonitions. Then he asked how he did it. The coach, smiling, answered that he hid his tracks. If the enemy has sensitive senses, you need to know how to hide your energy. After which the protagonist began to restore his wound. Getting up, he said that if he was going to make a hole in his stomach, he could at least tell him about it. The guy replied that he actually hurt him, and besides, it was almost healed. Larry looked at the bloody shirt, answering that didn't he pierce him so that he could regenerate. The coach, looking at his student, asked if he wanted to learn to hide his energy. The protagonist, frowning, answered that he did. We are transported to 2 days later. The elevator slowly descends. Larry comes out. They say that he is here. Suddenly, someone points a gun at him. The protagonist asked that today was a survival game. She answered that he almost guessed. After which Larry looked ahead in surprise when a bullet sharply passed him. It hit the wall, and the girl said that it was a modified weapon made of gas and specialized remote controls. She pointed the gun forward, adding that he should dodge. The protagonist smiled sarcastically, after which he began to run from side to side, dodging shots. The coach, looking menacingly ahead, made a couple more volleys, shouting that guns are dangerous. Hitting him will cause severe damage to his body. Let him move while she aims. The protagonist jumped from side to side, and she screamed that he needed to find cover, and if he did not find one, then he should run so fast that she could not aim properly, and he must run in zigzag, not allowing the other person to predict his movements. If he was caught in a reverse action, he should put strength into his muscles and change direction. He should use the tension to lift his body. Larry, frightened, felt a bullet graze his arm. The girl, raising her gun, screamed that he should not take damage. One hit will make him helpless. If he was going to take damage, then he should take it in a place where it would not be critical for him. Larry, turning around, thought that preventing loss of mobility is the same as the immortals. Training with both sides taught him that. He imagined a warrior and a bear in his head, thinking that the fighting styles of the immortals are adapted to their characteristics. He remembered running forward, thinking that they, the other shadows, had not taught him how to fight. Then he imagined himself falling to the floor, looking ahead in fear. An image of himself running appeared in his mind, thinking that he needed to survive. Then he remembered walking on a tightrope and arching his back, thinking that in any situation he might find himself in. The guy was cut with a knife, after which his body was shot, and he thought that immortals need to be wary of weapons such as knives. knives, which can cause damage in the existing radius. As for guns, a shotgun is more dangerous than a rifle. Then he imagined the guy punching the attacker from the hand, thinking that on the other hand, shapeshifters welcome those who attack with knives. All they have to do is dodge and hit. Reflexes, strength allow them to react like that. He pictured the guy running away from his opponent with a shotgun, thinking that the shotgun was much more convenient for them. It had a short range if they got close to it. The game was over, they could just move away so they couldn't be hit. Shapeshifters couldn't regenerate, so their movements were designed to not get hurt. There were a lot of rubber balls on the floor. The girl took a few steps forward, saying that the training was over. Looking around, Larry wondered how they were going to clean it all up. Then the trainer looked at the wire, telling him to get up and run along it. Larry lifted the bar, thinking that at least physical training was better than just stupidly inflicting injuries. Then he stood on the line. His face went pale, and he felt the monster approaching behind him. He frowned. Then he pushed off the line. A second later, he fell to the floor, and then turned around in fear. He looked at the trainer in silence for a few seconds. The girl, looking ahead in surprise, asked him what he felt. The protagonist turned pale, staring ahead. The girl, looking at her protege, said that it was called a wild bloodlust. She saw that he was able to feel it. The protagonist answered that she should not do that anymore. It seemed to him that his heart would break. He did not like it at all. She answered that it was normal and when he got used to it. A monster appeared behind her, and she added that if he had something similar, it would become easier for him. The protagonist turned pale, and she continued to tell him to continue training. Larry, looking at his trainer, thought that hellish training had begun, but strangely enough, after 2 days he stopped falling to the ground when running along the wire. He figured out how to resist the teacher's thirst for blood. Gritting his teeth, he continued to think that thanks to his heightened immortal senses, he was able to catch the feeling of bloodlust with his 5 senses and use his 6th sense to cope with it. Then he ran forward along the fishing line, thinking that he needed to bend his lower abdomen and hold it, then he would be able to cope with it. The trainer, looking at him, laughed, saying that he was doing well. The guy grabbed the blade. The protagonist, looking at the bloody weapon lying there, thought that immortal training was still akin to hellish punishment. In addition to organ regeneration, he had to train with axes, spears, and arrows. He fired several arrows into the protagonist's body. Larry looked at the bear trap, thinking that even with traps, he had to be especially careful with these. The guy pointed to his head, saying that if you step on one of them, it will cause terrible pain, and when the pain does not stop, the brain will work with difficulty. The protagonist asked what is meant by dangerous things that cause constant pain, and not instant. Looking at him, the trainer answered that usually immortals fight by simply receiving physical injuries, so pain must be accustomed, since pain makes logical thinking difficult. We are transported to some time later. Larry is running, dodging bullets, and thinking that this is why he had to consume poison later. The shapeshifter training was not much different either. He had to train, starting with weighted belts and vests. Then he lifted the bar, thinking that after which he added weight with sandbags on his wrists and ankles, and continued to train himself to dodge bullets and walk prob. The rest of the time he trained his body with dumbbells. His hands shook when he lifted the heavy bar. He thought that of course there were changes. In the middle of his training, his father went on a business trip for 10 days. The protagonist turned pale, looking at his parents kissing. The woman said what she would have to do if she wanted to see him while he was gone. The man replied that it was okay. They would see each other every night. We are brought to training. Larry holds a sword in his hands, thinking that in addition to holes all over his body, the teacher also taught him how to use conventional weapons in martial arts. The guy, looking ahead, said that he quickly learned how to use a weapon. The protagonist attacked with all his might, thinking that this was how it happened, but it did not mean that it was difficult. Holding the machine gun in his hand, he continued to think that maybe it was because he had a shapeshifter's physique and reflexes, but he learned quickly. On the other hand, the teacher taught him how to shoot a gun. The girl, looking ahead in surprise, said that it was also useful to study martial arts, but he could do it on his own. He would succeed if he watched a few video tutorials on the topic, but learning to shoot was difficult since it required him to use his senses. The protagonist pulled the trigger, firing a small burst, thinking that he was a mixed blood with the special 5 senses of immortals, so this was also easy to learn. So 2 months passed. It was night outside, the white moon was shining on the earth. The protagonist returned home, and his father asked him that he was in the gym. Larry thought that after a week's break from training, his hands were already itching to work out. Did his body really want pain? The man, smiling, looked ahead and said that he was very strong, despite being his son. The woman replied that this was good. The protagonist looked at his parents with a smile. His father said that he took an example from her, and the woman replied that it was because he was smart, like her husband. Larry thought that their relationship had always flourished. Why didn't they make him a younger brother or sister? He leaned over to the basket with dirty clothes. Then he looked at himself in the mirror. He put his hand on the counter, and then, looking menacingly at his reflection, he thought, why doesn't he have a girlfriend? His standards aren't even that high. Why should they be? He doesn't even want someone healthy and sexy like his mother, just someone pretty and mature, but at the same time inviting. It would be nice if she could cook, maybe have the same hobbies as him. If he could add something else to that. He wanted her to look good in jeans. If he could add even more, he wanted her to be smart and know what she wants to do. The woman looked at the phone. Then she looked down at her husband, saying that she was going to see a friend for a while. He replied, why so late? She said that her child was a high school graduate. She must be stressed. The man replied, it was quite a difficult time. He looked at the closed door for a few seconds, upset. Then he turned to the phone, surprised. The protagonist got out of the bath, saying that he couldn't find his phone. Looking at the couch, he added that no one was there anymore. He then sat up, looking at the screen. Looking at the message, he asked if there was an exam tomorrow. It hadn't been that long since he last took a big exam, but he felt strange. Thinking back to his comrades, he thought that his friends were surprised why they were going to go to college after taking the SAT. He didn't think it was a shame that he didn't use his good grades for anything. He never intended to go to college. Imagining dark matter in his mind, he thought that his path had already been decided 9 years ago on the day the great black hole called Hughes Gate opened. He remembered how he, as a child, lay scared under the pipes, thinking that he was crushed under the rubble of a collapsed building, and as soon as he saw it, he continued to look ahead in fear. Many dark figures appeared in front of him, and he thought that he had fought countless invaders, and he decided that he wanted to be like him. Smiling, looking ahead, he thought that his mother would be upset if she knew. She said that she wanted him to lead a normal life on the day of his awakening. We are transferred to the street. Someone asks where she went at all. The girl looks at her friend, raising her hand. Smiling, she added that under what pretext did she leave? The woman answered that she said that she needed to meet the mother of a student who lived in the neighboring area. Akin appeared, and someone asked that wasn't she curious. The coach, looking at the night city, answered that her son, she never asked how he was doing. The woman, looking ahead, replied that she just wanted him to be okay. For a half-breed, mixed blood of a human and a shapeshifter, usually not even half the ability. Then suddenly she opened her eyes, saying that she couldn't ask because she was worried. Someone was holding a phone. A voice came from it that he was serious. The man, standing on the roof, replied that he wanted him to throw him into the Pacific Ocean with his arms and legs cut off. He was answered that he really didn't know. He thought he didn't contact him because he knew. The protagonist's boyfriend is surprised, frowning, and a voice came from the phone that he is unconventional. We are transported back to the street. Someone says that he doesn't have to be brilliant or good. She just wants him to be able to stand up for himself against groups of mad scientists or something. The trainer put the jar on the table, answering that a group of mad scientists won recently, bastards who tried to combine various special species to create something superior to basically pure blood, irregular. The woman, menacingly looking forward, imagined a monster in her head, answering that they did not succeed. In the end, they created grotesque monsters with the strength of both parents. Turning to her friend, she answered that the conclusion of their action was only one, to be an immortal shapeshifter, superhuman or something else. If he has offspring with a human, he simply weakens the blood of the special species. The trainer, smiling, answered that she was lucky. Turning, she added that she hit the jackpot in the form of her son. We are transferred to the man. He fearfully asks what an irregular means. He is weaker than a quarter of the forces, after which he thought that he will at least reach the half because his bloodline is strong. After which his face turned pale, and a voice from the phone answered that, on the contrary, he was talented. He was a genius with talents that he had never seen before. He even taught him to hide his energy. The trainer, looking at the girl, said that his pedigree was not good, but excellent, and, moreover, his head worked well. The woman answered that she should not use such terms, after which the protagonist's mother's face turned pale, and her friend added that he even learned a wild thirst for blood. Larry's father, standing on the roof, said that if his friend was lying to please him, he would bury him for a good 2 weeks. The woman clenched her fist, replying that she would be seriously angry if she was joking. The guy next to the phone's ear replied that he was telling the truth, his son was talented, and the girl, smiling, added that her son was a genius. The protagonist's father and mother smiled sarcastically. They happily looked ahead at the same time, saying that they expected their son to. The protagonist walked forward, yawning loudly. Rubbing his eyes, he asked where his father was, to which his mother replied that he had gone on business, and that he should also quickly wash up and sit down at the table. A huge amount of food appeared in front of him, and Larry asked what such a feast was in honor of. The woman turned around and replied that today was an important day. The protagonist's face turned pale, his mother began to babble, telling a lot of information, and he thought that it was true. Today was the day of the civil service exams. Only his training was not for brain activity, but for survival, but that was not even the point. The exams for special employment, where fresh blood would rage. After a while, the plates were empty, and Larry thanked him for the food. He began to get dressed, and the woman asked if he was ready. The protagonist answered that yes, so much so that even in his sleep everything he had learned appeared. He thought that they had hit him on the ankle and pierced his organs. The woman, lowering her head, said that if he did not pass, his dad would be very disappointed. Turning around, Larry thought that it was obvious how confused she was. She didn't like the idea of him becoming a civil servant, but she also didn't want the exam to go down the drain. She seemed to be trying to support him, but at the same time she was worried about him, like a werewolf. Smiling, the protagonist answered that she shouldn't worry, thinking that he was also immortal. Then his mother, looking menacingly ahead, answered that then, if he failed, then let him know that he would meet her in the ring. Larry, looking ahead, thought that he remembered something that he would like to erase from his memory. The woman, smiling, said that if he didn't want to get it, he would just fuck the exams. Turning around, Larry answered that he would. Then he pressed a button for the floor. He slowly began to go down, thinking that music was the best cure for nerves after all. Then suddenly he opened his eyes, thinking that he had received the acute feelings of an immortal. He raised his head, thinking that why was he saying the wrong thing, and turning around, he regretted it. Now he would finally confess she was his love from the very beginning. Larry went up to the 13th floor. The doors opened, there was a girl in front of him, and he said out loud that this is how much he loved her. A second later, he looked away in surprise. The girl, looking at him, told him not to sing when he proposed to her. A handsome man does not necessarily have to be a singer. The protagonist lowered his head in depression. Answering why she was interested in this at all, she answered that he would not confess his love to her. He said no, and she asked why. Larry answered that he had already said 100 times what his ideal type was. She nudged him in the side with her shoulder, answering that he should stop. Taking his hand, she continued to say that such beauties with a good figure and brains are hard to find. The number for the first floor appeared on the screen. Larry jerked his hand, leaving the elevator, answering that she was in charge. Let her not say that on the street, because she knew where they lived. She wanted to give him a gift in the form of 2 iron bracelets, and about the brains, by the way, he did not agree. In my opinion, she forgot to mention greed. The girl ran after him, and Larry answered that she should not follow him. Approaching the bus stop, she asked where he was going. The protagonist answered that he needed to pass the exams to become a civil servant. The girl looked ahead in surprise, and the protagonist answered that, by the way, these guys know how to do advertising. Looking ahead, he added that he was busy. Let him go to school. The girl answered that she was in her senior year. Next year she would go to university. The protagonist said that he congratulated her and let her try not to waste her life on drinking. When she gets an ID card, his girlfriend answered that he was only a year older than her. After which she put her hand on herself in displeasure, answering that now she was already studying in a girls' school, but she would choose a regular university, and their rabid pack of wolves could attack such a beauty as her. Larry answered that first he should take care of his studies. He waved his hand, going to the bus, and the girl said that they needed to start dating, and he would help her with her studies along the way. It would be cool when her boyfriend would study well. The protagonist answered that who was whose boyfriend here, let him not scare away his future wife. The girl, displeased, showed him obscene signs. The protagonist adjusted his headphones and smiled, thinking that their lady hadn't changed, and if she got angry, she'd give him a hard time between the legs. The bus quickly moved forward. Then it stopped. A large building appeared in front of us. Larry went inside, thinking that 7:50 was somehow early. The exams wouldn't start until 9. Where would he even go? He approached the reception area, greeted the girl, stood up and asked what his question was. Larry replied that, as far as he knew, exams for special employment were being held here today. Suddenly, a man in a black suit appeared next to him. He asked what the protagonist was taking. The man looked menacingly ahead. A dark aura emanated from him. Then he angrily asked if the protagonist could show the application. Larry wondered why he was looking at him like that. We are transferred to the elevator. The man said that he checked. Let him go up the elevator to the 9th floor. Larry got off on the 9th floor, looked around. He asked what he needed here. A girl with red hair appeared next to him. She asked that he was going to an exam. Let him show his application. She checked the papers with a smile, answering that everything was correct. After the card, opening the door, she answered that he should go forward until he came across a door at the end of the corridor. He should go there. Larry, thanking him, thought that it was incredibly tedious. This is what exams are for immortals. In front of him was a long corridor. After a while, he reached a door on which it was written that an exam for special employment was being held here. Looking ahead, he wondered if there was good soundproofing there. He thought there would be a lot of noise and blood. They decided to hold exams in the very center, so this is what the power of the world government looks like. Then, lowering his head, he said, okay, thinking that he needed to get ready. He wouldn't be surprised if knives were thrown at him after opening the door. Perhaps dodging them could be a condition for entering the place. Whatever it was, he was sure the same torture awaited her as in training. He opened the door slightly. In front of him was an ordinary office. Then he was frightened to see a man at the end, who said that he was the first. The bald man, frowning, told him to come here and show the application. Larry thought that they had long ago made a cure for baldness from materials found in the white hole. Of course, if It had a side effect, but there were cheaper options. Looking at the man's head, he thought that this was a fashion for baldness. The guy looked at him in surprise. Larry smiled and came closer, pulled out the papers. He said that this was an application and an ID, and then thought about why they all took him for some kind of clown. The man pointed forward, answering that his number was 48, let him go there. The protagonist thought that it was not at all what he imagined. He did not have all these tables and chairs during training. After which he sat down, thinking that how did he know what would happen when the exam itself began? Even that bald guy with a knife could attack him. He looked menacingly in front of him, thinking that he must not stop being vigilant. A strong aura began to emanate from him, and he thought that he needed to be ready for any turn of events. After a while, there were many people sitting at tables around him, and they were holding books and notebooks in their hands. The protagonist's face turned pale. The bald man raised his pen, asking that there was someone who had not taken the subject to write on the exam. Then his attention was drawn to Larry. The protagonist slowly raised his hand. The man, looking at him, asked who he was anyway. Larry replied that it was a good question, thinking that of course he felt something was wrong, but there was no one to complain to. Then Larry was lost in thought, remembering how he sat with the girl at the table and realized that he had to study for the civil service exam, and all this flowed into a terrible torturous training. He ran in a hood, and his feet were covered in blood. He fell to the floor exhausted, and then he dodged a slashing attack. He understands that since he had such a fate, he decided to give it his all. The guy with the bloody sword stood next to the protagonist, and he sincerely wanted to pass this exam. Then he looked ahead and realized that everything went differently. He sat at the table, holding his hands near his face, and understood that in 10 minutes the exam was supposed to start, and he came here as the very first and sat in shock for 50 minutes. He looked ahead with an important look, folding his hands in front of him. He understood that there was someone in the audience who did not take a pen for the exam, and the last hope said goodbye to him. He took the pen in his hands and handed it to his friend. Larry held the pen in his hand and understood that in appearance it was the most ordinary marker, but the assessment for this exam was written. He looked at the other people and realized that even the atmosphere in this room was like a final exam, and he also didn't understand what these people were checking at all, and if he asked to show what they were doing there, he would probably be considered an idiot. The girl was sitting at the table and looking down, and the protagonist noticed that everyone here had a rather unusual appearance. The guy was also looking down, and Larry realized that some of them could have been sent to idle right away. And then the protagonist got up from the table and realized that it was true because one of the guys caught his eye the most. Then we see how the guy was holding a book in his hands, and Larry realized that his hands were simply incredible, and also this guy would be good for an advertising model. The man with blonde hair looked away. Then he turned his head. Larry looked away with a ridiculous face and was lost in thought. He hoped that this guy did not think anything strange about him. Then a guy and a girl came into the room. Larry was sitting at the table and looking ahead in shock. Then they started to lead something around the office. Larry was sitting at the table, and a wall was put up to him. He leaned on his fist and realized that now everyone would receive their exam tickets. And the protagonist was lost in thought and realized that these people decided to put up a screen for the hypersensitive immortals, and he also thought that the distance between the trunks was very huge. He looked to the side and heard someone late. The man gave Larry a sheet of paper with assignments, then said that his number was 50, and he had to go here, and the protagonist understood that if it were another exam, he would not be in a hurry to take it either. Then we see a sheet of paper with a test for special employment of an immortal. Larry thought that the immortal exam would be very easy in general, but everything was not so, and he had to take his words back. He held a piece of paper in his hand and put his hand to his head. I suggest that he run with knives better because he was better at it. Then he looked away in surprise. He looked at the task sheet, where it was written that he received a through wound in the leg the size of a 101 coin, and he had to choose the action to take first. Larry held his hand near his face and realized that he had recently complained that the test was too difficult. He looked ahead and immersed himself in his thoughts. He realized that the answer to this question was 4 if he did not belong to a special race. Then the 2 and 3 answers here could also be very important, and if we assume that the weapon was a throwing type, then it was better to start with stopping the blood. Then he imagined the man pulling the bowstring, who said that the first thing he needed to do was stop the bleeding, otherwise he would go into shock, and he had to do hemostasis, and then find shelter, and that's what the teacher had told him, although after a couple of runs with knives, he finally realized that by stopping the bleeding, a minor wound would not threaten the immortal's life. Then he looked at the test with task number 2, which asked what percentage of blood had to be lost to cause shock. Larry remembered how the coach cut him with a knife, and his teacher coupled him on the brain constantly because he never had this shock. And also his teacher said that immortals were similar to people in the basics, and in this case the correct answer was number 3. The protagonist sat and wrote the test, holding his hand near his head, understands that he could not dodge the swing of the knife, he had to do something in this situation. He chose to put his hand out, and also heard about the importance and mobile power because it is much more than everyone actually thought. He held a pen in his hand and wrote down the answers. I understand that suddenly he remembered one movie that he watched a long time ago. He held his hand near his neck. I remembered that it told about a man who came from the slums, and he also took part in a quiz where a huge amount of money was at stake, and he guessed the answers based on his life experience. The other guys sat and puzzled over this, and Larry realized that this exam asked the test takers what they had been through in this life, and having the body of an immortal, they should also know a lot, and his second level of knowledge was at its best. He sat at the table and remembered all his events. He realized that the advice that the teacher gave him, as well as the information that he was able to get there, were needed by him from his own experience, and all this told him that he answered correctly. Then he put his pen on the table. He looked at the tests, folded his hands and realized that everything turned out so that his training with the teacher was training. He took a sheet of paper with text and realized that there was another question on the back, which said that he should write about how it was possible to kill an immortal. The protagonist looked forward and wondered how it was possible to kill him. The whole answer was obvious. He raised his head from behind the screen and said that he was finished. The man with the bald head said that there were still 60 minutes left and those who had finished could leave this room and leave the answer sheet with the exam sheets on their desk. Larry looked towards the doors. He looked at the girl with the folder and realized that he had seen her at the entrance. The girl asked if he had read what was written on page 1 of the sheet with questions. Larry looked and pointed his finger at the folder, saying that he had to leave his consent. The girl nodded her head with a smile and Larry realized that this was some kind of collaboration between a werewolf and immortals, and the girl said that she would hope for his success. The protagonist looked away with a smile and thanked her. Then we see the night sky and a huge building. The bald man was holding his head. He took Larry's test, decided to look at it, where it was written that an immortal could be killed by strangulation, infection, and other various ways. Then we see the guy holding his neck and strangulation. All of this was dangerous for an immortal, and also it was a loss of consciousness due to airway obstruction. Nearby we see a guy who was frozen with liquid nitrogen. Then we see a person burning to ashes, and burning in fire was one of the most terrible, because the burns of the whole body made the proper activity of the immortal impossible. After we see blood stains, and dismemberment was also one of the terrible types of murder, because so the probability of regeneration in this case was inaccurate. The guy with the bald head looked ahead and realized that it was possible to endlessly describe the ways to kill an immortal, because in other words there was no definite answer to this question, and most immortals had only a strong immunity immunity to safety. Then he looked at the test with the task and did not understand how many ways to harm an immortal he knew, and judging by the last question, he understood this topic, because therefore it was necessary to take into account all the deadly weapons in the situation. Then he imagined the body of a person with the energy that flowed in his body, because the body of an immortal was capable of regeneration, but it could also die, and knowing all this, it was possible to significantly reduce the likelihood of death, and even without memorizing all the ways to eliminate an immortal, this could be achieved without problems. Then he looked at the personal data of the protagonist. Immersed in his thoughts, he heard that this person was born from a human and an immortal, and his physical abilities, perhaps, were not the best, but he had brains, and he checked the test completely, and his score was an example for impression. He looked ahead and imagined the smiling protagonist in his head. He understands that his one impression was quite suspicious, because he did not look like an immortal. He came before everyone else and stared at one point for an hour and left before everyone else, and he did not bring a pen to the exam. Then, after half a month, we see how the phone began to vibrate. Larry took the phone in his hands and told his mother that he successfully passed the exam. He showed the girl's phone and said that he, however, not only passed it, but took first place. Then he looked at the message congratulating him for getting first place in the civil service written exam. Then his mother put the knife on the table. She snatched the phone in her hands. Then she stared at it and was happy that her son got first place. She pointed at the protagonist and told him to put on his pants with an elastic band because he was allowed to unbuckle his belt today. Then we see the night sky and a huge building. Larry looked down with a smile and said hello to his father. His father was holding bags in his hands and he told him to at least pretend that he was looking at him and not at the meat. Then we see the meat frying on the stove. Then they were holding bottles of drink in their hands. The father looked ahead with a smile and said that he didn't even doubt his abilities, and it was understandable because he was the son of good parents. Larry looked away and remembered his teacher and realized that the questions were much easier than he actually thought. He sat at the table and they ate meat together, and his father said that since the results had come out, there would be an interview soon. His mother looked at his father and he said that he didn't know exactly when it would be, but it would probably start at a government enterprise and it would all be under the Ministry of Administrative Security. Larry ate meat silently. His father looked ahead with a smile and realized that his mother hadn't noticed anything because his father always acted like that, but it seemed to him that he was trying to evade his answer. Larry held a chopstick in his mouth and thought about the organization, not understanding why the government and this organization chose immortals and what it did by hiring immortals to serve as a government employee. The protagonist ate meat with a sad face and was lost in his thoughts, realizing that he had a lot of questions, but no one was going to answer them for him. Then we see the night sky in a building and the protagonist asked his father to give him at least a little advice for the interview. Then the protagonist put the jacket on his body, after which he straightened his tie. Then we see a piece of paper with information, and Larry realized that soon after the joyful news of first place for the test he had completed, he had received a message with the date of the interview, and of course, the interview was to be held in the same building. The father looked ahead with a smile, and Larry realized that he had not given him any light, because he did not know what he had to say, because at the interview he had to show his individuality and answer clearly and distinctly. Then the protagonist walked forward with the understanding that nothing could be done in this situation, and the strongest had to win. The mother looked ahead with a smile and wished him luck. Larry straightened his tie and thanked her. Then we see an electronic scoreboard. Larry walked forward along the street and turned his head. He pressed his hand to his head and thought. He thought while the girl was looking at him, and he also realized that in such a wonderful outfit he could go straight into show business. Larry looked away and said that they had been running into each other too often lately, and he also said that even though it was the weekend, it would be better for that girl to sit with her textbooks instead of walking around. He waved his hand to the side, and the girl said that he would become her tutor when he himself would understand something. The girl pointed her finger forward and said that that suit suited him. Larry looked back and said that he knew that. Then we see a huge building, after which we see a sign with a waiting room for applicants. The protagonist looked at the people and realized that everyone was trying too hard, and he, too, needed to listen to more of other people's stories about interviews. Then he looked at the blonde guy and realized that this was the same prince who sat next to him during the test. Then the guy opened his eyes, after which he closed them and looked away. Larry looked at all this situation was deep in his thoughts. He did not understand why this guy behaved so strangely, and this time he decided to sit away from him. Then we see the corridors where people were sitting on the couches. Then the man opened the door and called number 48. Larry entered the room. The red-haired guy looked away, and the protagonist realized that he had eerily white skin, and he also had fiery hair, and he was 100% sure that everyone called him by the nickname Candle. Then he looked at the smiling girl, whom they had seen more than once because she had been on the jury since the first stage. Larry was sitting on a chair, and the girl asked what prompted him to apply to their company. The protagonist looked ahead and said that if he said that his father made him do it, he would fly out of here with a whistle, and so he had to come up with something. Then he said that he was very interested in finding out his capabilities in such a difficult exam. He looked at the red bald guy and said that he also decided to fulfill his dream because he wanted to fight for his people and his homeland. The guy with red hair looked ahead and asked then what sacrifices he was ready to make for a comrade in battle, because everything depended on the given situation. Then asked if he had any intentions to sacrifice anything in this battle. Everything was taken for a reason. He just had to find an effective way out of a difficult situation. The girl with the red-haired pair silently watched and listened, realizing that all this sounded too provocative. Larry looked at the girl who said that his mother and the girl were drowning in the water and who he had to save first, to which Larry said that he did not think that he would have to choose, because he swims well and he will be able to save both at once. The guy with red hair looked at the protagonist and asked what he would do when he had only one bullet left, but there were two targets. The protagonist answered that he would shoot one and try to defuse the second, threw a gun at him. Larry sat opposite the girl who imagined this whole picture, after which she grabbed her head with her hands, and Larry realized that if you think about it, then maybe his answers were not entirely obvious. And in general, this interview should come to an end. A few days later, Larry was holding the phone in his hands. He was lying on the bed and was covered with a blanket. His mother came into the room and said that he had been lazing around too much lately after the interview, and then asked if he had any plans for today. Larry raised his head and imagined that he was in the ring. They say that if he fails, he should spar with her. Larry looked at his mother and said that he had decided to dedicate this day to something very important. His mother looked ahead silently. Then she clenched her hand into a fist angrily, realizing that she suddenly wanted to do something. Then we see the blue sky and buildings. Larry held his hand behind his head and realized that if they all got the upper hand, they would be in a lot of trouble. Larry was sitting with his mother at the table, and she was telling about the frequent cases of beatings. She looked ahead and imagined how wolves howled at the moon. It is said that this is how the story of werewolves crying at the full moon came about, and one of these werewolves could not control his instinct, and he decided to get up and swim above the moon, and then there was just a full moon. She sat at the table and said that if he could not control his own desires, then he should go outside and scream. It should make it easier. But Larry said that if you believe all this news, then the most problems were caused by magicians, and besides, he never heard anyone howling in the middle of the night. Larry looked ahead and imagined people running, because if you think about it, then after awakening the ability, his mother often took him with her to the mountains. It was obvious, because all this for him was like training. Mother pointed her finger ahead and said that the second way to relieve stress is to save the remaining energy and spend it